So to complete this series of talks on social credit, I'm going to be speaking today on the topic of Douglas's philosophical ideas, viewing these once again in terms of their central themes. It is vitally important to understand that underlying both the economic and political systems envisaged by social credit theory, there is a general philosophy and a general policy that is based on that philosophy. In the same way, the existing economic and political orders are characterized by a very different, we might say an antithetical or contradictory philosophy and policy. For this reason, you cannot really do justice either to the existing economic or political orders or to their social credit alternatives unless you understand the underlying philosophy and policy of both. You cannot analyze and evaluate them properly unless you also take into account the more purely philosophical dimensions of each alternative. Now, in mentioning their underlying philosophies, I'm not using philosophy in the strict academic sense, but rather in the more narrow sense that Douglas intended when he used the term. For him, philosophy referred to a conception of reality, a way of conceptually representing the world around us. All of us, without exception, have an image in our minds of what we take the world to be. We have beliefs about what we think exists, what is true, what is false, what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil. That vision of reality may be more or less sophisticated, may be more or less thought out, but it is bound to be present. Of course, we do not only think or reflect, we are also beings that act. And in order to act intelligently, we have to base our actions on our conception of things. The objectives that we actively pursue, both as individuals and as a community, in other words, our policies, are always, without exception, based on or can be traced back to some philosophy. We act in the way that we do because we believe certain things about the way in which reality is constructed. Not all philosophies are of equal worth, however, and as a direct consequence, not all policies are of equal worth either. What entitles us to draw this judgment? Well, Douglas recognized, as many Western thinkers have before him, that there is an objective reality, a reality that exists independently of our minds, independently of our perceptions and our desires, and that reality is governed by laws. Things either are or behave in certain set ways under certain conditions. These laws are also independent of human thinking, perception, or preference. As Douglas once put it, the rules of the universe transcend human thinking and cannot, in the ordinary sense of the word, be altered, and therefore must be ascertained and obeyed. In other words, our faculty of free will does not give us the power to make or alter the laws of the universe in order to suit ourselves. Some of these laws are philosophical or mathematical in nature, while others are scientific or historical, etc. In their totality, Douglas referred to these laws as constituting what he termed a canon. The canon, in conjunction with the objective facts of any given situation, provide us with a standard against which differing philosophies and policies can be measured and then compared. In an article that was entitled "On the Pursuit of Truth," Douglas described the canon as follows: There is, running through the nature of the universe, something that we may call a canon. It is the thing which is referred to in the Gospel of St. John as the Logos, the Word. It has an infinite variety of names. The engineer and the artist refer to it when they say that they have got something right. Other people mean the same thing when they talk about absolute truth or reality. But whatever name you wish to refer to this idea, it does not matter very much. We all instinctively recognize its existence, whether we meet it in something like architectural proportions, as say the cenotaph, or even in the grim lines of a battleship. So yes, it is true that we all have philosophies, and we all adopt policies in accordance with them, but it is not true that all philosophies or all policies are of equal worth, precisely because some philosophies or some conceptions of reality are closer to embodying the real nature of things in comparison with others. That is, some philosophies are truer than others. Hopefully, as we go through life, we are constantly revising and refining our philosophies by always trying to bring them into a closer alignment with what really exists, with the way things really are. What we should be trying to do is to discover, as best as we can, what is the true philosophy, what is the true picture of the world. If we perform that task successfully, or to the extent that we perform it successfully, we grow in wisdom. And as we grow in wisdom, we should expect that our actions, our policies, will yield results that are more and more satisfactory because they will be more in line with the nature of reality. This is, at the most fundamental of levels, the intention of religion or the religious outlook on life. This is why Douglas defined religion as the binding back of thought and of action to reality. If we don't find ways to successfully bring our actions into conformity with reality, we will never have any hope of God's will being accomplished here on earth as it is in heaven. In view of these preliminary observations, I think that if there's a key word for understanding the philosophy of social credit, that word would be correspondence. More specifically, the correspondence between thought and action on the one hand, with the objective nature of reality on the other. Social creditors are seeking to conform their minds and their activities to reality. And this is why social credit has often been described as advocating economic and political realism. From a realistic perspective, the existing economic and political systems yield unsatisfactory results, in a number of instances gravely unsatisfactory results, because they embody incorrect policies that are grounded on false philosophies. That is, the philosophies underlying them, the philosophies that serve as their foundation, do not correspond to the nature of reality, and so, quite naturally, their accompanying policies are not sound and do not work very well. If we want our economic and political associations to function optimally, or if we want any association of which we are a part to function optimally, then clearly we need to figure out what is the correct social philosophy, and hence what is the correct policy when it comes to human association. Douglas held that any successful association had to exist for the sake of the common good of its members. In other words, an association, whether political, economic, or cultural, exists for the sake of the mutual benefit of individuals, of all of the individuals who comprise the association, not of some at the expense of others. This does not necessarily imply that all of the members of an association must benefit equally in a strictly mathematical sense, but it does imply that they should all benefit equitably. In other words, Douglas's philosophy regarding social matters is this: the individual is more important than the group, and therefore it is proper for the group and the activities of the group to be subordinated to the well-being of each individual member. This, of course, is a very Christian way of thinking about social relations, and it is in direct opposition to collectivistic ideologies such as communism, fascism, National Socialism, or socialism in general, as well as to ideologies that go too far in the opposite direction, such as libertarianism and anarchism. Now, if this Christian vision of society provides us with an accurate conception or picture of reality, if it is fundamentally true, and I think that it is, then it follows that associations can only survive and flourish to the extent that we find concrete and adequate methods of putting this philosophy into practice. So what happens when an association goes wrong, so to speak? Well, you will have noticed from your own experience that every association is composed of two distinct elements. There is the administrative hierarchy, whose task it is to carry out the general policy of the association. And then there is the common membership, whose task is to cooperate by respecting the basic rules of the association and to provide the administration with the help and resources that are required for it to perform its tasks as they are required. Accordingly, associations can go bad in one of two ways. Either the administrative hierarchy uses its power to serve its own interests at the expense of the common good. We call that an oligarchy. Or else the common membership fail, to a greater or lesser extent, in their basic duties towards the association. In the first case, the association stops serving the common good in an optimal manner because the administration has replaced the general policy of the association with a self-serving policy. The hierarchy is making use of the resources of the association to benefit itself first. This typically requires that the common members are placed in a position of dependency on the hierarchy. In other words, they are put into a position where, in order to obtain what they need from the association, they have to serve the hierarchy's own interests. We see this dynamic in the case of the economic system and the political system. Just to be clear, social credit is not opposed to hierarchy as such. Hierarchical administration, provided you've got the right people in the right positions, is the most efficient mechanism for getting things done. It encompasses the division of labor and a clear chain of command. The problem is not with hierarchy itself, but rather with the abuse of hierarchy in associations, that is, the use of hierarchy to serve the self-interest of those who sit at the apex of the hierarchy rather than the common good. In the second case, the association stops serving the common good because the common members, or some of them in any case, are no longer acting in good faith. There are people who would like to enjoy the benefits of association, but who do not want to contribute to its proper functioning by helping to bear some of its burdens. Sometimes there are freeloaders who do not adequately support the association that serves or tries to serve their common interests. Both of these tendencies, the tendency to oligarchy on the part of the administrative hierarchy and the tendency to freeloading on the part of the common member, can and often do coexist. In fact, in our present social circumstances, I often feel that the social creditor is caught between a rock and a hard place, between the financial and political oligarchs on the one hand and the masses on the other, who, through lack of knowledge or will, actually support, by their action or inaction, the existing order. Both of them are essentially parasitical in nature. They feed off the goodwill of the association. Such antisocial tendencies are dangerous, not only because they wound our communities and weaken the capacity of our economic and political associations to consistently achieve satisfactory results, but if taken to their logical extremes, they can actually result in the dissolution of the association that is plagued by them. At some point, the dysfunction will become so great that people will either not want to be part of the association, or they will be unable to actively participate in its operation. So you see, we can distinguish two basic types of regulations. There are those regulations that maximize the freedom or power of each individual and association in an equitable, though not necessarily equal way, that result in an overall increase in freedom or power for each individual. And then there are those regulations that fail to maximize the power or freedom of the individual and result instead in an overall decrease in freedom or power for the common member of an association. The underlying policy of the oligarch might be described as a false conservatism where the social order is concerned. In order for the group to serve the self-interest of the administrative hierarchy at the expense of the common good, all sorts of artificial restrictions have to be imposed on the common member. In other words, the member has to be made to do things that are not actually required by the demands of the common good. He has to be made, for example, to pay heavy and illegitimate taxes, or to suffer constant inflation, or be saddled with debt and its accompanying interest charges, or be forced to work longer hours in a job he may not particularly enjoy as part of making a living. The underlying policy of the freeloader, by contrast, might be described as a type of false liberalism, where restrictions or demands that are necessary for the achievement of the common good are disregarded by the freeloader, at least in reference to his own case. By refusing to do his fair share of the work, as it were, the freeloader undermines the common good. His policy cannot be universalized, as it would end up destroying the association entirely. If everyone did what he did, there would be no association at all, just as if everyone tried to be the top oligarch, there would be no association either. Even though the form of their respective policies are different, with the oligarch directly supporting excessively restrictive policies, and the freeloader directly supporting insufficiently restrictive policies, both saboteurs of the social order share an underlying philosophy. They both think that in some way, most individuals, or the common individual at any rate, exists to serve the group, and that the group exists to serve them. If instead we want associations to really serve the common good in the best possible way, to the greatest extent possible, then we need to correctly discern what a given association requires in order to function well, and then to ensure that the right regulations, and only the right regulations, are implemented in view of that particular end. In other words, we need to steer a clear course between Scylla and Charybdis, between the false conservatism of the oligarch, of the collectivist in all of his various forms, and the false liberalism of the freeloader, whether we are speaking of the practical or theoretical anarchist or libertarian. That middle path, which actually lies above the two extremes of the false liberalism of the freeloader and the false conservatism of the oligarch, is the path that is indicated or represented by the social credit approach to the social order. Being a right or sound policy grounded on a true or correct social philosophy, the social credit path promises to deliver satisfactory results where the existing alternatives have so spectacularly failed.
However, since it's a matter of philosophy, do we need to unprogram ourselves and start seeing things that are unseen, rather to find a way through all this?
Yes. Well, I think we certainly have. The idea is, do we need to become demesmerized, dehypnotized? Do we need to relearn the essentially correct social philosophy? Right. And I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, we've been retreating from the correct principles and the correct policy, the correct philosophy probably for centuries, but more particularly in the last couple of decades. So there's certainly a need to reacquaint people with the basic principles of a healthy social order. And if we can do that, I think social creditors will make the greatest contribution to social well-being that it's been made in a very long time anyway.
The point of it being our community and our nation needs to find out what association means for the common good.
Right. Right. If you want to associate for the sake of the common good, then there's certain principles that have to be respected. There are certain mechanisms that need to be implemented. So it's important to raise these questions because I think too many people take the existing order for granted and assume it can't be improved on. And if it can't be improved on, we're in a very, very sorry state. But we know that things have, in the past, been better from certain points of view. And there's no reason why they can't be modified and made better in the future.
Yesterday, one of our speakers was Major Bernard Gaynor, and one of his points that actually resulted in him coming to this meeting was his objection to the breaking, with encouragement at a government level, of one of these natural laws. And that bears dwelling on a little bit because it's so much in our face that the biologically deviant is in fact being presented to us as being normal and the result of some almost genetic inclination, and therefore it must be right, and so on and so forth. Well, it's really in support of this philosophy. We can all have beliefs, but they can be false beliefs. And we as adults, the older we become, the more we become aware of things that are not true. And it might be commercialised in the form of a program such as Mythbusters that are dealing with scientific things, but that also has an extension into the reality of the situation. You observe things. You know if you touch something that's hot, what will be the result will be. You don't have to warn. So I think that bears cultivating. It's easy for us to think of our own path that we're treading, but you've also got to be aware of the multiplicity of paths that other people are treading based on erroneous beliefs or in fact intimidation, and that's what I regard as being the political correct. It's an intimidatory thing that you must believe it or you should believe it, and you're not a right and proper thinking person if you don't.
I'd like to ask, how does the Christian law of love fit into social credit?
I think the easiest way of answering that would be to say that if you set associations up in such a way that the group and the activities of the group are serving the individual, then that's one of the best ways of putting the law of love into practice, that the whole motivation is one of service. There's no question of domination, and we serve in order to promote, protect, build up the common good, which benefits everybody. So love your neighbor as yourself. What could be simpler?
Yes, I'm very interested in education, and the big mystery to me is we have private schools, we have home education, but this to me is a subject, the most important subject that needs to be taught. Why is it that the Christians of all denominations, I've tried all denominations, will not touch anything that's connected with finance and social credit?
Yes.
What experience have you had?
Well, I did give copies of my books to my parish priests a couple months ago, and they received it enthusiastically. But now I get the impression, and maybe it's my imagination, but I do sometimes get the impression that they're wanting to avoid me. But perhaps, I don't know, perhaps I'm reading into the situation. Maybe they're mulling it over. I think the big problem, of course, with finance is that no one who is dependent on finance is wanting to bite the hand that it directly or indirectly feeds them. And so you have to be pretty immune or reckless, as I suppose I am, to disregard that and go ahead anyway. Because there's too much at stake for people to be playing games at this stage, I think.
Dr. Heydorn, I spoke with you last night about the fact that it's been my experience that the regular churchgoer doesn't ask questions about his own faith and just accepts what comes from the pulpit.
Right.
And of course it was not with me because I was not a churchgoer, but I asked questions. Now, how are we going to get through?
How are we going? Well, I suppose as far as Christians are concerned, the best way of trying to get through is to point out that, as it says in the New Testament, faith without works is death. And if they disregard these sorts of concrete, practical matters, if their Christianity is purely transcendental and not practical, well, I think you're justified in saying that they're not really Christians. This is a recurring problem. How do you break through? How do you reach people? We need to consult the canon. We need to figure out how the psychology works, how to make that happen. And certainly there have been instances in the past where people have broken through. So we have to figure out what works. That might be different in different times and places, but certainly there is an answer out there. We just have to keep digging and trying and experimenting to see what will work best.
Sorry, I've got a question to follow on from that one as well, and it's about the canon. And I think we all accept that there's objective truth. It's easy to argue with someone who accepts objective truth, but has a different understanding of what it is than you, because you can argue over something concrete or definite. One of you is right or wrong, or you could both be wrong, but there is truth there. One of the problems we have today is that when you argue, it's a meaningless argument because the person you're arguing with doesn't actually accept that there is any truth at all.
Right.
And I think you probably answered this question a little bit in your previous answer, but how do you argue and win an argument with someone who says that there is no way of winning an argument because there is no such thing as truth?
There is this tendency, if you deny certain basics of reality, you end up reintroducing them. And if they have at least a modicum of respect for intellectual integrity and logical consistency, then they should recognize that, yeah, you cannot hold that there is no objective truth without contradicting yourself. And there are, of course, many other arguments that you could bring forth to back that up. Yeah.
Jeffrey, you want to frame a question?
Yes, my word. My friends, people who talk about truth or say there's no truth, I hold up my fingers because they are unique. There are 8 billion in the world who are unique. Every fingerprint is different from every other fingerprint. I wonder who did that. Is that the truth?